Hello, everyone. So today we are having a choice of games and hosted games authors meeting. And First thing is we're going to introduce ourselves, and then we're going to answer some questions that have been asked on social media. So I am Jim Dattilo, author of the Zombie Exodus series and Vampire the Masquerade Out for Blood. And I've been writing for Choice of Games and hosted games for about the past 10 years. Hannah?
Hello, yes. So I'm Hannah Powell-Smith, and I have written Blood Money, Creme de la Creme, and Noblesse Oblige for Choice of Games. And I've been writing with Choice of Games, I think, 5 years now.
Hi, my name is Eric Moser. I'm the author of the Community College Hero series and Talon City, which is coming out in just a couple weeks. And I started writing back in 2013, so almost a decade. My first game was published back in 2015.
Great.
Zach.
I am, Zachary Sergi, author of the Heroes Rise trilogy, the Hero Project duology, and the Versus trilogy. Heroes Rise just celebrated its 10th anniversary, which is quite wild. So that published in 2012 was one of the earliest ones. And I have my first hosted game coming out in January called Fortune the Fated, which is now a duology, as we've all learned. That is my Choice of Games history.
Great. So first question we have is actually from Stephen Young from Facebook. He wants to know, have any of us produced something which comes from our past, from experiences that we've had? How much do our own experiences and life come into play with our games?
I can start. So I I write about superheroes in space and stuff. So it's not about my life in any kind of like directly autobiographical way. But I will say, especially in writing characters, there's a lot of real life that kind of seeps in. So I mean, when I wrote Heroes Rise, it's about a young hero in a city trying to make it as a hero, and I had just moved to Los Angeles trying to make it as a writer. So a lot of my emotional experience was poured into that, and I think maybe that's part of what made it feel more real, is because even though none of us are actually superheroes, everyone kind of can relate to being a young person trying to figure out your life. And then there are little things like characters are inspired by real people in my life and little bits and pieces. It ends up being a big brew, but like for example, my mom is a college president, or university president rather, and the mom in Versus is a general. So my mom is not a general in real life, but I know what it's like to have a mother who is in a position of leadership, and that bled into Versus. So it's always little details here and there, at least for me.
Yeah, that's similar for me, actually. It's not sort of like, it's not a kind of one-to-one representation of something from life, but sort of little details or sort of aspects of a characters or a situation. Like some of the kind of mostly like some of the more minor characters, or kind of things like some of the family dynamics in some of my games have been based off kind of mildly stuff from people that I know. And I guess with mine, like they are all fantasy, some more fantastical than others, so there's that. But with Creme de la Creme, I didn't go to a boarding school, and my school wasn't like really fancy one, but it was a selective school, and it was quite a strange, like odd environment because of it was a grammar school in the UK, and some of the kind of very like kind of pressure cooker environment aspects was something that I drew on a bit for that. But yeah, it's sort of like what Zach was saying, of kind of some things are relatable even if they're in a kind of strange setting or kind of exaggerated. So that's me really.
And I write superhero stuff like Zach does, and I've so I weave in some realism when I can. Like there's a teacher in the Community College Hero series who also happens to be a lawyer. She's basically me, so I kind of work myself into the series as the voice of reason, really, when you come down to it. So I did find that opportunity, and I have one game that is not as well known called Zip, but I threw a theme of aging and past your prime type of questions into that story. They were pretty relevant themes because superhero game, I was like, what happens when you hit 40? Just like athletes fall off, wouldn't the same thing sort of happen? And so I really enjoyed weaving that in because a lot of people had said, well, I'd like to read more stories and more games with age and passing the baton and keeping up with progress and changing society, all those sorts of themes. And those could probably be worked into pretty much any premise, really. So that's called Zip, and I really did, because those things were hitting me hard when I was in my early 40s, and I definitely worked some of that into that game.
Good. And actually, we have a question for you directly from my Discord. Somebody actually asked, after Community College Hero 3, are you planning to continue with the series?
Well, first I've got to get 3 done. So I don't want to get too optimistic in the future, but it just, it depends. I mean, I've got a superhero series that I'm just starting. So I've got that. I hope Talon City does pretty well. It's designed as a one-off, but there's lots of room for a series. And I've talked to some players over the years about, what would a CCH new game series look like? And I've thought about something called like the Knights of Nebraska, where there's a time jump, but a lot of these things have been done. And it's difficult because most players, I don't think, want everything new. Like they don't want me to call a Community College Hero, 4 and have a brand new player character at a brand new school. And I'll bring in 1 or 2 characters as like teachers, and that's it. They generally like the characters. And so I'd have to figure out, is there really a viable way, especially when the, what hits the fan at the end of 3, is there really even a potential to like save people for later? Because that limits what you can do with your finale. So I would say it's an open question, and certainly something that I would probably think about, but I just want to focus on getting 3 done. And I don't want to limit or in any way cut off possibilities for a big spectacular ending by trying to keep room for more. So I do want to make sure I deliver a satisfactory climax, and that's probably my priority as opposed to keeping it alive in the future.
Yeah, I will say, in building off of what Eric said, there are very few interactive novel series out there, probably for a reason, because again, the longer it goes on, the more complex the story becomes. So at a certain point, it just becomes, especially if you're a solo writer like all of us are, it just becomes unmanageable to pass a trilogy. So I understand and empathize with what you've said. I know people want to continue, but the being able to realistically deliver what they want gets harder and harder the longer a series goes on.
Yeah, it's something I'm actually facing with Safe Haven. I mean, I've thought about just continuing on and on and on. But at some point you also do say that there needs to be a stopping point, and people need to be given an ending that is tailored from the story that they've built. And so I've actually thought about creating yet another like standalone game, which draws some characters from the other 2. And then again, there's the things that Eric talked about, like how do you realistically tie in one game to another without it just feeling like fan service? Especially in my games where at the end of the original Zombie Exodus, the story could have been that, anywhere from humanity is saved to humanity is really just decimated. So how do you realistically justify that you could actually continue after that with the same character or other characters? So
Right. You can't deliver a satisfying diversity of alternate endings without knowing that it's the end. Right. It's hard to do both, or not hard, maybe impossible, unless you have like a team of writers.
I think
And a lot of
especially
the-
when
Go ahead.
sorry. Especially when you've got such like huge physical stakes and danger, you kind of want to have a sense of like, oh, what if my character dies, or like what if other people have horrible things happen to them, or all that kind of thing. Like I think if you want to have room for such big stakes, then it's quite tricky to then be like, oh, but how will this carry on? And it might feel a bit cheap if it's sort of like, oh, well, this thing was all okay in the end, like even though it felt very dangerous at the time.
Well, with a series too, especially CCH, but probably a lot of series, when the game designers, we look at like how to structure these things, and like you talk about like the arm and the hand and the fingers, and you talk about like from a structural standpoint, like once you start branching with these fingers and these fingers get fingers, you're pretty much at end game at that point. Like there's not much going back from that. And with CCH, it's been mostly arm because it has to be arm. I cannot branch out with fingers in the first semester. It would never get finished. It just would never happen. So I've been able to keep it mostly arm with a little branching. Some characters may die, some may leave. So that's enough, variability for, writing a scene with a character in book 3 that's dead for some people, that they're never going to see that content. So you have all these little side contingent scenes, and that's challenging enough without, again, once you get to the fingers, which is what the sequel, the finale is supposed to be about, is the fingers. Then again, the more I think about it, the sequel of number 4 or continuation, I don't see how it's not just either a reboot or just moving on to something new, because I'm not sure how you come back from that. Because you never want to, I don't think, at least for me, I don't want to like act like people's choices didn't like really happen, like they're not canon, or like they can be erased somehow. I'm not looking for alternative dimension type stuff or erasing past events. So the things that have happened. And I don't want to cheapen anything by like, well, I'm just going to take this one branch and kind of like, dive out. Like I've got to deal with kind of all the ramifications. And again, that's plenty challenging enough.
yeah, this actually goes into our next question. What is the biggest challenge that you've had with your most recent game? I don't know. Zach, do you want to try this one?
Yeah, I've got one coming out in January, so I'm really in the thick of it. I'm playing with a whole new interactive structure that I've never done before, and was truly planning it as a standalone, so that I could and not a series, that I could do a lot of that stuff. And it's just gotten so long that it is now a duology. So I'm doing a series anyway. The challenge with this one has been, I'm telling you can kind of assemble the story in modular parts, for lack of a better term. So you can kind of like read different chunks of stories, and that was the goal in the beginning. It's now that it's a duology, it's not as it'll happen over 2 books, but the idea is that you can kind of chunk together the story based on your own missions. And unlike some of the novels I've written before, there's really, I don't like the word failure, but you have mission objectives and you can not succeed in them in a much more gamey way than I've ever done before. So it's been fun, but it's challenging trying to keep the story moving when so many different things can happen. I actually have the interactive structure of all the different parts is the same, which has been a trick to pull off. Don't know if it'll work. We'll find out when people read it. That was a very general, broad level answer. Does anyone have anything more specific?
Well, I would say like I'm Talon City's coming out in just a couple weeks, and it's a fantasy story. And so I'm stepping out of my comfort zone a little bit. And I've also found that I've kind of loved the world building, and I started off thinking this is probably a one-off. And I tell you, after you spend a year, 2 years, off and on, 140, 150,000 words or more, writing a game in a universe, I'm finding it really, really hard to let go and to say, okay, I've spent all this time on this universe. That's it. I'm moving totally on to something else. I'm going to forget all about it. It's there. I tend to like writing games that, honestly, even if you stripped the interactivity away, they could still stand as a story. I think there are some of our products that would meet that standard and some that don't. And there's nothing wrong with it either way, because some are just designed to be more gamey. But for me, I just find myself writing things where it could probably be a book, it really probably could, because of all the world building and the characters. And so I've really struggled with, to end it in a satisfactory way that does not scream, oh, we need a sequel, or that does not give the reader a full 3-act experience, while, like what we've been talking about, while still leaving the door open for more adventures. There's a tenuous balance there for me. How much closure do you get versus how many doors do you keep open? So I've decided for now it's one, but there is definitely room for more adventures depending on how things go.
Right. And Hannah, I guess you've had the most recent book that has actually been published. So what was your biggest challenge publishing that?
Yeah, so that was Noblesse Oblige, which is a standalone game that's in the Creme de la Creme setting, but with a different character. And that's very separate from Creme de la Creme. And I think some of the challenge with that one was that it's designed to be a shorter and kind of intensive, quite focused experience. But I was really conscious that I wanted to give the players a really satisfying playthrough and have the replayability, and sort of have time to get to know the characters and kind of have the breathing room for scenes. But sort of keeping that interactivity, like it does have the kind of ARM type structure that then branches out more towards the end. But I kind of wanted your kind of background choices to really matter, and kind of the main character is someone who's dropped out of university, and that happened for different reasons depending on what your choices are, and I wanted those to be called back to, and kind of for players to have a strong sense of who their character was, but kind of doing that in a shorter space of time, it was definitely a kind of a challenge. And during the testing process, there were questions about sort of, oh, I want to have more time to get to know these characters before I kind of commit to kind of befriending or romancing them. And so I had to kind of make more kind of careful decisions about giving more space for that, for a player, no matter how many times they were playing it. Whereas I think if it was a larger game, I might have sort of cut off some of those and sort of been like, oh, you can only speak to 2 characters in this playthrough at this particular time. But then I was like, no, I'll let them speak to all of them, because that will make them feel like they've kind of gotten to know the characters better at that point, and also kind of give it make the playthrough length longer. So it was sort of the balance of making sure that there was a good playthrough length and that it was a nice solid kind of time, while also keeping the replayability.
I have a kind of more specific. So I finally came to a decision about how to use achievements in the new game that I'm writing, and I'm very curious how everyone. The strategy I've taken, which might be the general one, is to kind of make the achievements a roadmap for, okay, if you've achieved all of these things, you've kind of read every iteration of what this game book could be. How do you all use achievements while we're on this, since that's my latest challenge?
Yeah, I think that's kind of how I've been doing it as well. I mean, when a game happens, like Vampire the Masquerade Out for Blood, I I listed all of the possible endings as achievements, so people know if you're going to replay it, here's what you could get to see in the next replay. Any key milestones that you reach in the game, usually I'll have an achievement, and then sometimes I'll do counters. Again, in like Zombie Exodus, if you get this many zombie kills, if you get this many zombie kills, there's different achievements. And then the other main category is like, have you tried to play this type of character? Because in Zombie Exodus, you could be very varied characters. You could be, kind of the moralistic survivor. You could be a kind of like a Negan from The Walking Dead. You could be kind of like the crazy dictator. So I actually do have some achievement that kind of align to the personality stats. And again, it's to let people know that they're available to them.
That's exactly how I do it. Do you two have a different strategy, or is that sound familiar?
Yeah, I think that sounds similar. It's a nice way of signposting what possibilities there are, because obviously you can look at how many words there are in a game and kind of go, okay, that is a big game, and there will probably be lots of branches there. But if the achievements are sort of giving you hints, then that's quite useful. I think I also have some sort of very ones that kind of hint towards very obscure paths, or kind of, just like you have to have done quite unusual, I guess, or specific things to have gotten to it, as a sort of like a hint that there's this is hiding somewhere. As well as kind of having ones that are sort of like a skill thing, I guess, like the counters that Jim mentioned. Like if you have achieved something that's quite difficult, like I think in Creme there was get the highest grades over your school year, or like get into a really good university, something like that.
Yes. I also love a good pun, so I use puns a lot. Sorry, keep going.
Let's go ahead.
No, I just was like, I love puns, so I use puns in my achievements quite a bit. It's like a fun place to do that. But anyway, what were you
No, I was gonna say, I write jokes too. All of my achievements in CCH, they're all jokes. Like literally all of them are puns or jokes or teasers. Just say what the heck does this mean? Like, to encourage wacky decisions. People might say, well, that's not the most optimal thing, or I would never do that. But wait a second. This sounds like what was teased up there, if they look at the title. So I do like this crazy, wacky. It doesn't have to be, to me, it doesn't need to be super important. It can be just a wacky corner of the game, a little nook and cranny to where most people may not look. And go look there. There's an achievement there. And in Community College Hero 2.5, I put in some short stories that were unlockable by achievement. So you would have a certain interaction with a character, and it could result in someone mentioning what might seem like a throwaway line, but which triggers a achievement, which unlocks, also included in the game, a short story on a separate menu. And I'm like, I might do that again. And also might include some art assets in there too. Just, any kind of goodies that we can kind of hide and encourage people to explore and find. There's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. And I really enjoy kind of hiding. I get more emails about people trying to find the stories than anything else so far. And so some of them were a little, frustrated, but they were still asking. So that's not a bad thing.
Yeah. And that might be actually a good question to our readers. Like, what types of achievements do you enjoy seeing? So maybe, I know all of us have social media, have Patreon. So if any of our readers want to, get back to us and tell us what types of achievements they like to see in the game, we're open to that type of feedback. So
yes,
we're happy to hear it. So, but it looks like we are out of time. But I want to thank you all for coming and meeting today and talking about your experiences with your games. And I believe we're going to be doing this, or at least trying to do this quarterly. So I hope to see you all back again soon. Thanks.
Thanks so much.
Have a spectacular day.